in Desert and Wilderness, Chapter 4. Pan Tarkowski, as well as Mr. Rawlinson, who loved Nell better than his life, was delighted at the arrival of the children. The young pair greeted their parents joyfully and at once began to look about the tents, which internally were completely fitted up and were ready for the reception of the beloved guests. The tents appeared superb to them. They were double. One was lined with blue and the other with red flannel, overlaid at the clothes, as they were as spacious as large rooms. The agency, which was concerned about the opinion of the high officials of the canal company, had spared no effort for their comfort. At first, Mr. Rawlinson feared that a lengthy stay under tents might prove injurious, and if he agreed to the arrangement, it was because they could always move to a hotel in case of bad weather. Now, however, having fully investigated everything on the place, he came to the conclusion that days and nights passed in the fresh air 100-fold more beneficial for his only child than a stay in the musty rooms of the small local hotels. Beautiful weather favored this. Medinet, or rather El Medineh, surrounded by the sandy hills of the Libyan desert, has a much better climate than Cairo and is not in vain called the land of roses. Owing to its sheltered position and the plentiful moisture in the air, nights are not as cold as in other parts of Egypt, even those lying further south. Winter is simply delightful, and from November the greatest development of the vegetation begins. Date palms, olive trees, which on the whole are scarce in Egypt, fig, orange, mandarin trees, giant castor oil plants, pomegranate and various other southern plants cover this delightful with a forest. The gardens are overflowing, as it were, with a gigantic wave of acacias, elders and roses, so that at night every breeze carries their intoxicating Here one scent. Breathes with full breast and does not wish to die, as the residents of the place say. A similar climate is possessed only by Helwan, lying on the other side of the Nile and considerably further north, but Helwan lacks such luxuriant vegetation. But Helwan awoke sad recollections for Mr. Rawlinson, for there Nell's mother had died. For this reason he preferred Medinet, and gazing at present at the glowing countenance of the little girl, he promised to himself in his soul soon to purchase here land with a garden, to erect upon it a comfortable English house, and spend in these blissful parts all vacations which he could secure. And after finishing his service on the canal, perhaps even to reside here permanently. But these were plans of the distant future and not yet wholly matured. In the meantime, the children from the moment of their arrival moved about everywhere like flies, desiring even before dinner to see all the tents as well as the donkeys and camels hired at the place by the cook agency. It appeared that the animals were on a distant pasture and that they could not see them. However, near Mr. Rawlinson's tent they observed with pleasure Kamis, the son of Hadigi, their good acquaintance in Port Said. He was not in the employ of Cook, and Mr. Rawlinson was somewhat surprised to meet him in Medinet, but as he had previously employed him to carry his implements, he engaged him at present to run errands and perform all other small services. The evening dinner was excellent, as the old Copt, who for many years was a cook in the employment of the cook agency, was anxious to display his culinary skill. The children told about the acquaintance they made with the two officers on the way, which was particularly interesting to Mr. Rawlinson, whose brother Richard was married to Dr. Clary's sister and had resided in India for As it was a childless marriage, this uncle greatly loved his little niece, whom he knew only from photographs, and he had inquired about her in all his letters. Both fathers were also amused at the invitation which Staś had received from Captain Glenn to visit Mombasa. The boy took it seriously and positively promised himself that sometime he must pay a visit to his new friend beyond the equator. Pan Tarkowski then had to explain to him that English officials never remain long in the same locality on account of the deadly climate of Africa, and that before Staś grew up, the captain already would hold his 10th position in rotation or would not be on Earth at all. After dinner, the whole company went out in front of the tents, where the servants placed the cloth-folding chairs, and for the older gentleman brought a siphon of soda water with brandy. It was already night, but unusually warm. As there happened to be full moon, it was as bright as in daytime. The white walls of the city buildings opposite the tents shone greenly. The stars glowed in the sky, and in the air was diffused with scent of roses, acacias, and heliotropes. The city already was asleep. In the silence of the night at times could be heard only loud cries of cranes, herons, and flamingos flying from beyond the Nile in the direction of Lake Karun. Suddenly, however, there resounded the deep bass bark of a dog which astonished Staś and Nell, for it appeared to come from a tent which they had not visited and which was assigned for saddles, implements, paraphernalia. That must be an awfully big dog. Let us go and see. Pan Tarkowski began to laugh, and Mr. Rawlinson shook off the ashes of his cigar and said, also laughing, "Well, it did not do any good to lock him up." After which he addressed the children. "Remember, tomorrow is..." That dog was intended by Pan Tarkowski to be a surprise for Nell, but as the surprise had started to bark, I am compelled to announce it today. Hearing this, Nell climbed in a trice of Pan Tarkowski's knees and embraced his neck, and afterwards jumped onto her father's lap. "Papa, how happy I am, how happy I am." There was no end. Finally, Nell, finding herself on her own feet, began to gaze in Pan Tarkowski's eyes. "Pan Tarkowski, what is it, Nell?" "As I already know that he is there, can I see him tonight?" exclaimed Mr. Rawlinson, feigning indignation. To this little fly would not be content with the news itself. As Pan Tarkowski, turning to the son of Hadigi, said, "Hamis, bring the dog," the young Sudanese disappeared behind the kitchen tent, and after a while reappeared, leading a big dog by the collar. "No," she exclaimed, seizing her father's hand. On the other hand, Staś grew enthusiastic. "But that is a lion, not a dog," he said. "He is called Saba, lion," answered Pan Tarkowski. "He belongs to the breed of mastiffs. These are the biggest dogs in the world. This one is only 2 years old, but really is exceedingly..." "Don't be afraid, Nell, as he is as gentle as a lamb. Only be brave." Hamis let go of the collar with which he had restrained the dog, and the latter, feeling that he was free, began to wag his tail, fawn before Pan Tarkowski, with whom he was already well acquainted, and the children gazed in the moonlight with admiration on his large round head with hanging lips, on his bulky paws, on his wonderful frame, reminding one, in truth, of a lion, with the tawny yellowish color of his body. "With such a dog one could safely go through Africa." "Ask him whether he could retrieve a rhinoceros," said Pan Tarkowski. Saba could not indeed answer that question, but instead wagged his tail more and more joyfully, and drew near to the group so ingratiatingly that Nell at once ceased to fear him and began to pat him. "Saba, nice, dear Saba." Mr. Rawlinson leaned over him, raised his head towards the face of the little girl, and said, "Saba, look at this little lady. She's your mistress. You must obey and guard her. Do you understand?" "Whoa," was the basso response of Saba, as if he actually understood what was wanted. And he understood even better than might have been expected, for taking advantage of the fact that his head was on a level with the little girl's face, as a mark of homage he licked her nose and cheeks with his broad tongue. This provoked a general outburst of laughter. Nell had to go to the tent and wash herself. Returning after a quarter of an hour, She saw Saba with paws up on the shoulders of Staś, who bent under the weight. The dog was higher by a head. The time for sleep was approaching, but the little one asked for yet half an hour of play in order to get better acquainted with her new friend. In fact, the acquaintance proceeded so easily that Pan Tarkowski soon placed her in lady fashion on Saba's back, and holding her from fear that she might fall, ordered Staś to lead the dog by the collar. She rode thus a score of paces, after which Staś tried to mount his peculiar saddle horse, but the dog sat on his hind legs, so that Staś unexpectedly found himself on the sand near the tail. The children were about to retrieve when in the distance on the marketplace, illuminated by the moon, appeared walking towards the tents. The hitherto gentle Saba began to growl hollowly and threateningly, so that Hamis, at Mr. Rawlinson's order, again had to take hold of the collar, and in the meantime 2 men dressed in white burnouses stood before. "Who is there?" asked Pan Tarkowski. "Camel drivers," answered one of the arrivals. "Ah, Idris and Gebr. What do you want?" "We come to ask whether you will need us tomorrow." "No, tomorrow and the day after are great holidays during which it is not proper to make excursions. Come on the morning on the 3rd day." "Thank you, Effendi." "Have you good camels?" asked Mr. Rawlinson. "Bismillah," answered Idris. "Real saddle, fat humps, and as gentle as Haga lambs. Otherwise Cook would not have employed us." "Do they jolt much?" "Gentlemen, you can place a handful of kidney beans on their backs, and not a grain will fall during the fullest speed. If one is to exaggerate, then exaggerate after the Arabian fashion," said Pan Tarkowski, laughing. "Or after the Sudanese," added Mr. In the meantime, Idris and Gebr continued to stand like 2 white columns, gazing attentively at Staś and Nell. The moon illuminated their very dark faces, and in its luster they looked as if cast of bronze. The whites of their eyes glittered greenishly from under the turbans. "Good night to you," said Mr. Rawlinson. "May Allah watch over you, Effendi, in night and in day." Saying this, they bowed and went away. They were accompanied by a hollow growl, similar to distant thunder, from Saba, whom the 2 Sudanese apparently did not please.